Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be back in Ohio. I am born and raised Ohioan. Let me get my little timer on here in case I know how much I'm running my mouth off. And I actually, some of the stuff I'm talking about, I actually lived in Cleveland for 2 years after college. My wife's from here. And so Cleveland's definitely a big part of my story, and I'm always glad to come back. My talk today is a remix of this book, Steal Like an Artist. I'm actually going to talk about stealing like a writer today. And if you want to tweet about it, there's the hashtag Steal Like a Writer. But I'll get right into it. So the premise of the talk today is that writing is a skill that can benefit any career. Any career you're in, writing can make you better at what you do, or at least more attractive, or help you do it. And I actually want to read you this segment from Rework by 37 Signals. I actually need to make it bigger so I can read it. So this part of 37 Signals book, Rework, they talk about how if they are having trouble deciding on a job candidate, they actually will hire the better writer. If the playing field's even and they have trouble figuring out which person to hire, they hire the better writer, and this is why. Being a good writer is about more than writing. Clear writing is a sign of clear thinking. Great writers know how to communicate. They make things easy to understand. They can put themselves in someone else's shoes. They know what to omit. And those are qualities you want in any candidate. Writing is making a comeback all over our society. Look at how much people email and text message now rather than talk on the phone. Look at how much communication happens via instant messaging and blogging. Writing is today's currency for good ideas. So, we can all do better in our lives and in our careers if we become better writers. So how do we become better writers? Do you have the faults that mean you were born a writer? The thing is, writers are not born. They are just like everyone else. They are made. And there's a way to get better at writing. And writing is not about being some crazy person or whatever. So the rest of the talk, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I discovered my main method of writing, and then I'm going to give you a kind of list of 10 grab bag items that you can use to get on your way to becoming a better writer yourself. But first of all, this is my nightmare, the Microsoft Word screen. I think we can all kind of know where I'm coming from on that one. The cursor kind of blinks at you like it's taunting you. But anyway, I went to school to study writing. When I got out of school, I hit what you just basically call a good old-fashioned case of writer's block. But what happened was I had always subscribed to the daily newspaper. And the funny thing about newspapers is they kind of stack up in the recycle bin next to your desk. And one day I was sitting there without any ideas, and I looked over at the stack of newspaper and said, well, maybe I could get some ideas from the newspaper. And what I first started doing was I started cutting the pictures out of the newspaper, and I started kind of collaging them in my notebook, trying to come up with ideas for short stories or that kind of thing. I soon found out that I was actually neglecting the majority of what runs in the newspaper, and that is the words. I might not have had any words, but right there next to me in the recycle bin were thousands of them. So here's what I did next. I started making a collage out of words. I took a permanent marker that I drew with, and I started making boxes around words. And I started connecting those words into little phrases, funny sayings. And when I was done and I had something I liked, I blacked out what I didn't need. And this is what it looks like when they're done. It kind of looks like if the CIA... Oops. Yeah, it kind of looks like if the CIA had done haiku. I called them newspaper blackout poems, and I started posting them to my blog. And slowly, ever so slowly over time, people would send me emails and leave blog comments telling me just how unoriginal my idea actually was. And this is the guy they pointed to the most, Tom Phillips. To give you an idea, Tom Phillips is a brilliant British artist, and to give you an idea of his kind of cultural spread, you all know the musician Brian Eno, the producer, worked with U2 and Talking Heads. Tom Phillips was Brian Eno's painting teacher in art school. So what Tom Phillips did in the 60s is he walked into a bookstore, he picked up the first book he could find for like 3 pence, and he took it home and he started making blackout poems out of it, basically. Circling certain words, connecting them, and then making designs out of the rest of the page. And he's actually been doing this for 40 years. The original book was called A Human Document, which he shortened to A Humument. And as you can see, the work became ever more ornate and colorful, and they're really, they're art pieces. And again, he's been doing this for 40 years, and it's just kind of become his thing. Now, the funny thing about Tom Phillips' work is that he actually got the idea for A Humument from this guy named William Burroughs. William Burroughs had what he called the cut-up method. And what Burroughs would do is he would take an existing piece of writing, he would take that piece of writing and he would fold it up or cut it into different sections, and then he would rearrange the pieces to get new combinations of writing, and then he would retype the new combinations. And he used this, the cut-up method for many of his most famous novels. And when he gave an interview in the Paris Review, that's what Tom Phillips originally read. The funny thing about Burroughs' work is that he actually got the idea for his cut-ups from his buddy Brian Geisen. Brian Geisen was a painter at the time. He was preparing a canvas and he sliced through a stack of newspapers. And he saw the way that the strips played against each other and the way words would get rejiggered. And so he decided that he could make writing out of the newspaper. And he started collaging bits and scraps of newspaper to make poems. Seems pretty original, right? Well, about 30 years before that, there was a writer named Tristan Tzara who walked up on stage with a newspaper and a hat, cut up the newspaper into pieces, threw the pieces in a hat, pulled them out one by one, and read them like they were a poem. You're detecting a pattern here. I trace things all the way back to the 1760s, to a neighbor of Benjamin Franklin's, actually. Caleb Whitford was a wine merchant and a diplomat, and what Caleb Whitford would do is he would sit in the pub with his buddies, and back then the newspaper columns were very skinny. So what Caleb Whitford would do, instead of reading a column top to bottom, he would skip across columns. So he'd read a line from one column and read a line from the next column, and he would come up with all these funny combinations. I'm going to read a couple for you. Tomorrow the new Parliament will meet, to be sold by auction to the highest bidder. This day His Majesty will go in state to 16 notorious common prostitutes. Notice is hereby given, and no notice taken. So not only was my idea completely unoriginal, it turns out there's a 250-year-old history of finding poetry in the newspaper. So what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to quit because my idea was not completely original? Or am I supposed to keep moving, keep pushing forward, keep making work, trying to get better? Well, I chose the latter, and that's because I slowly came to understand something that a lot of artists and creative folks know, but they're not always exactly forthcoming with the information, and that is, nothing is completely original. All creative work builds on what came before. Every new idea is just a remix or a mashup of 2 or more previous ideas. So what I decided to do is take these fellows who had come before me and form them into this wacky family tree, to see them as a kind of creative lineage. And I would add those fellows to the artists that were already inspiring me, who I felt were my heroes. And I would steal everything from them I possibly could. Yes, steal. People ask me a lot, they say, why do you have to use the word steal, Austin? Like, why do you gotta say that, man? And I say, that's because I'm not very original. Pablo Picasso, he said, art is theft. David Bowie was once asked if he was an original. He said, no, 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 I'm more like a tasteful thief. The only art I'll ever study is stuff that I can steal from. Steve Jobs in the 90s was giving a television interview, and he came straight out with a Picasso quote, which is actually misattributed to Picasso. Good artist copy, great artist steal. And Steve Jobs said he was always shameless about stealing the best ideas. Woody Allen, maybe one of our best filmmakers, says the same thing. He's a shameless thief. And you might not know this guy, Wilson Misner, but he said something that I bet you've heard before. He said, you steal from one, it's plagiarism. If you steal from many, it's research. Bob Dylan said, you steal a little, they throw you in jail. You steal a lot, they make you a king. But maybe the best quote about creative theft comes from the poet T.S. Eliot, and this is where the Picasso quote is often misattributed from, and I wanted to read you the whole thing. T.S. Eliot said, immature poets imitate, mature poets steal. Bad poets deface what they take, and good poets make it into something better, or at least something different. The good poet welds his theft into a whole of feeling, which is unique, utterly different from that from which it was torn. So what I decided to do was, yes, I would steal everything I could from these fellows who had come before me, but I would try to push it into new directions. Instead of trying to make my work as colorful and ornate as Tom Phillips' work was, I would make my work stark, pure black and white, simple, kind of Ramones to Tom Phillips' psychedelic Sgt. Peppers, if you will. And this is a matter of opinion, but where Burroughs' writing can borderline on craziness and illegibility, I want to make my poems very readable. It's always important to me that they make sense to the reader, that they try to say something. And so that's what happened for my first book, Newspaper Blackout, how I put that together. So for the rest of this talk, I wanted to kind of explain, I have like 10 little tips that I think can help people become better writers themselves, like I say. And the thing I really learned from Newspaper Blackout and the whole experience doing that is that all writing is in fact a collage. How to think about writing is that as human beings, we actually were constantly collecting language. This is how we learn to write. We collect words in our heads, we collect little bits and phrases, and we read, and we collect this stuff, and then we just recombine it into new combinations, and that's how we learn. And of course, if you're thinking about collage, the major way to gather material for your writing collages is to read. You have to read, and write your books, which we'll talk about in a minute. Good reading leads to good writing. That's indexed for my friend Jessica Hagee. If you sit through a lot of writing workshops and in creative writing workshops when you're in college, you'll run into all these people who will tell you, well, I really like to write, but I don't really like to read. Those are the people you know are never going to make it. Because Stephen King has a quote, he says, if you do not have the time to read, you do not have the tools or the material in which to write with. Now, a big question is, what do you read? What should you start reading? And I actually think you should start reading what you love. You should start off reading the things that give you delight, the things that give you pleasure. Start with the stuff that really resonates with you. There's this fellow named Marcel Duchamp, and he said, I don't believe in artists. I don't believe in art, I believe in artists, is what he said. And I actually think that's a pretty good method for studying. if you try to ingest the whole of your discipline at once, you're going to choke. Instead, I think you should start with one writer. Start with one thinker that you really admire. I know there's musicians here, I know there's designers here, I know there's artists. They all wrote, a lot of them. Start with one writer that you really love. And it doesn't have to be in your discipline. Just find a writer that you really love, that really resonates with you, and read everything that that writer wrote. Completely saturate yourself with their work. And when you've done that, you find 3 writers that influence them. And it's pretty easy to do if you read interviews and stuff like that. You can come up with 3 great writers who influence that original writer. And you do the same thing. You completely saturate yourself with their work. And you repeat this process as many times as you can. And what you come up with is a kind of creative lineage. A guy named Alan Jacobs calls this swimming upstream. Instead of you find a book you really love, instead of reading the stuff that came after it, read the stuff that came before it. And then you have this whole kind of culture and history behind you. And one way to keep track of stuff that you should read after you read a book that really appeals to you is to write the names of books that come up in your books in the back of your books. To put myself in high company, that's one of my lists on the left, and that's Charles Darwin's list of books to read on the right. But it's very important to keep a reading list, and when it comes to stuff to read, I like to keep things organic. I like to let one book kind of lead into the other. And you don't have to always stick with the family tree. You can make leaps and stuff. But the important thing is to think about, always have in mind what book you're going to read next when you finish the book you are reading. The other thing I would recommend for reading is to write in your books. This is a really, really important thing that you can do. Always read with a pen. And circle things that pop out at you. Make arguments with the author in the margins. This is actually called Marginalia. And if you do a Google search, you'll find all sorts of interesting things about this. A couple examples of Marginalia. This is David Foster Wallace's Marginalia for Silence of the Lambs, which is actually a really great book. And there's a guy named Sam Anderson who actually he's an editor for the New York Times Magazine, and he publishes his Marginalia every year, and they're really great. He has all kinds of he has little arguments with people in the margins and stuff. This is Francis Ford Coppola's notes for The Godfather. He had a notebook in which he put every page of the book that, the Godfather novel that he was adapting. He had notes all over it. And if you have a library book, just make a list of, just take a receipt or something and write notes with it. The funny thing about Marginalia is you can actually push your Marginalia into making new writing. This is 13 views of what is that? Is that Wallace Stevens? This is a Wallace Stevens poem that said, "A man and a woman are one. A man and a woman and a blackbird are one." So I crossed out blackbird and put dachshund, because that's what I have. And that describes my living situation. You can think of sentences as Mad Libs. Do you guys remember Mad Libs? Sentences are just little structures that you can remove words and stick new words into. Take example, this line: "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." This is Charles Dickens from Tale of Two Cities. But you could totally steal this line and use it for one of, say a recommendation. He was the best of bosses, he was the worst of bosses. There's a guy named Kenneth Koch who was a poet that he actually did this with comics. He would tell his students to take a comic, don't read it, but white out all the balloons, and then make up your own dialogue. And that was a way for students to get more writing. I'm going to have to speed things up here a little bit. Keep a swipe file. A swipe file is just what it sounds like. It's a place to put the things that you've stolen and access later. Newspaper reporters call it a morgue file, and I like that even better because your morgue file is where you put the dead things you're going to reanimate later in your work. A couple examples of a swipe file. This is Nick Cave's handwritten dictionary. Nick Cave would actually write down words that he had found and wrote them down in this book. This is Mark Twain's scrapbook. Everyone carries a copy machine in their pocket. Use your phone. It's a great way to keep a swipe file. Number 4, always carry paper and pen. If you leave with one thing tonight, it's this. Always carry paper and pen. This is one of the most important things I did as a writer. I saw this graffiti on a bathroom wall in Austin, Texas. It says, "God is smart enough to bring a Sharpie with." And that's kind of my mantra. Always have a Sharpie or a pen on me. Always carry a pocket notebook. Mark Twain did it. There's an example of Mark Twain's notebooks. This is Charles Darwin, I think Beethoven, and then that's Ernest Hemingway. And artists need pockets. You need pockets in which to put your paper in. Arthur Russell always wore double-breasted shirts and stuffed it full of musical scores. David Hockney actually had his suit coats tailored so he could fit a sketchbook in there. Now that rule, artists need pockets, has a corollary, which is always check your pockets for ideas before you do the laundry. I like to say in my book, you will need curiosity, kindness, stamina, and a willingness to look stupid. And you have got to get used to pulling out your notebook and writing in it, and doing it at dinner parties, doing it on the subway. Get used to looking stupid, because it's better than losing good ideas. And lest you think that the writing in your notebook has to be serious, I actually think lists are a great way to write, and they can organize your life. Some of my favorite lists. This is Johnny Cash's to-do list. It says, not smoke, kiss Jude, not kiss anyone else. And the funny thing about lists is they can actually tell stories in themselves. The simple act of listing things can actually tell little stories and say things about people's lives. Number 5, step away from the computer screen. Remember that cursed Microsoft Word screen? Step away from it. John Cleese, he says, we don't know where we get our ideas. What we do know is that we do not get them from our laptops. And the cartoonist Linda Berry, she says, in the digital age, don't forget to use your digits. Linda Berry wrote her first book very quickly on the computer, and it came out real fast. And then it took her 10 years to write her second novel, Cruddy. And Cruddy only came to her when she started writing with a paintbrush. She wrote every page of Cruddy using calligraphy, red paint, and a paintbrush. And what Linda said was the simple act of making marks on a page led to writing that she could not accomplish otherwise, because when you're using the computer, there's too many chances to hit the delete button. And there's something magical about using your hands when you're writing. Good ideas kind of flow. You just keep your pen moving. One way I accomplish this, because it's hard to take yourself away from the computer, is I actually have a digital desk and an analog desk in my office. My digital desk is where I have my computer and my scanner and everything that needs electricity. And then my analog desk is where I have all my tools that only need my elbow grease. And there's something about switching physically into those different spaces that allows me to kind of get in a different headspace and the good ideas come. People always ask me, like, what kind of writing software do you use, man? And I'm like, you know what, forget the software, forget the laptop, spend $10 in the school supply aisle. It'll do you way more good. A magical school supply that I clamor for is index cards. Index cards are magical for a writer. There's a great section about index cards in Anne Lamott's book, Bird by Bird, which I recommend everyone read. She actually keeps index cards in little stations all around the house, so whenever she has an idea, she can just jump over there and write. And she also sticks index cards in her pocket when she takes the dog for a walk. She's not the only writer that used index cards. Nabokov wrote a lot of his novels, including Lolita, on index cards. The cool thing about index cards is you collect everything you can. If you have a new project, you write all your ideas individually on index cards. You let them stack up. Then you lay them out where you can look at them. And then you start sorting them into piles and finding themes. And this is a great way to find writing. This is actually what I did for my first book, Newspaper Blackout. I had 250 poems, so I printed them all out on basically index card size pieces of paper. And I spread them out all around the room, and I started sorting them into piles. And I had them all over my office. And then I started sorting them into themes, and little themes emerged, and eventually that's how we came up with the narrative for Newspaper Blackout. And this is actually how I do all my work now. Steal Like an Artist. In the back of the book, there's actually deleted scenes, which were little index cards that the book started with. And for this talk, actually, I used index cards to kind of come up with my ideas about writing. Number 6, don't wait until you know what you think to get started. I will keep this very simple. The act of writing is discovering what you don't have a thought first and then write it. You actually discover your thoughts through writing. The simple act of writing can uncover thoughts that you didn't know you had. You know, people say like, oh, I just need to get my thoughts down on paper. That's exactly what you need to do, and I'm sure some of the visual artists can understand that too. You know, the minute you start sketching, that's when your ideas really come into play. Number 7, keep a daily routine. It's very important with writing not to just have a lot of time to write, but to have a daily schedule for writing. So a lot of people ask me, like, oh, I've got a day job and stuff, like, how do I find time to write? I say, you don't find time, you make time. And one of the things that I recommend to people is, you know, everyone works better at different times of day, but I say if you can train yourself to become a morning person, then you can just get up in the morning, do your 10 or 15 minutes of writing a day, and you're done. And if you do 10 or 15 minutes of writing a day, you will get better at it, no matter what. I also recommend a calendar for getting writing done. You break your writing, whatever you need to write, you break that writing up into daily chunks. And then if it's a long project, you just make sure every day that you get that little daily chunk done, and you check the box. And your goal then is to just keep checking the boxes and not break the chain. This is actually the calendar I used for my first book, Newspaper Blackout. One really easy thing that you can do every day, writing, is keep a logbook. A lot of people have trouble keeping a diary, but I actually keep a logbook. And what that is, it's a very simple, silly list of just all the things I did that day. I write down what I had for lunch. I wrote down who I talked to on the phone. I write down what I watched on TV. It's just a really easy way to kind of get down on paper the things you do every day. Number 8, write something you want to read. Kurt Vonnegut says, if you open your window and try to make love to the world, you'll get syphilis. Instead, you should write for just one person. Stephen King talks about how he has an ideal reader in mind when he writes, and that is actually his wife. He got lucky and married someone who liked to read his writing. I'm the same way. I actually write for my wife. She's the one who reads everything I write after it's done. But it doesn't have to be a real person. It can be someone dead in the past. It can be a better version of yourself. I think the important thing is to just write to satisfy one person. And one way to get distance on what you write, to see it as if it was something that you would want to write, is to put things in a drawer. The drawer is a magical place. You write something, you stick it in a drawer for a week, and when you pull it out, you can treat that piece of writing as if it was someone else's. This is President Obama's speech notes, and if you notice, it almost looks like a blackout poem. You can pretty much treat your own writing as a blackout, and this is actually an even better example. This is a Philip Roth manuscript. So write something, stick it in a drawer, forget about it, and then play with it later. Number 9, tell Oprah stories. So going back to Kurt Vonnegut had this idea that you can graph every story on a chart. And what this chart is the x-axis is beginning and end, and the y-axis is good fortune and ill fortune. So here are the stories that Kurt Vonnegut graphs. This is called the man in whole story. This is what a lot of romantic comedies are based on. A character starts with really good, things are going really well, and then a lot of bad stuff happens, and then in the end they pull it together and there's a happily ever after ending. This is what a creation story looks like in the Bible. God makes something, God makes something else, God makes something else, and it's a bunch of steps. This is a Cinderella story. Cinderella starts out way low, and then she gets these things, and then she goes to the ball, and then her life sucks real bad for a little bit. Until the prince comes along. And this is Kafka's Metamorphosis. Now, I have a patented story shape that works for getting almost anything you want in life. So pay attention to this. This is what the story shape looks like. It kind of looks like a crooked stair step. And this is what these are the points on the graph. Past, present, and future. And what this means is where you've been, where you are, and where you want to go. And a lot of times this translates in certain a lot of times this translates in your writing to how I got here to where I am, how I've exhausted my resources, and how I can get where I'm going with your help. So this is how it plays out. A homeless guy came up to my wife and I the other day, and he had a great structure of this. He said, I just got out of jail, I got a family to feed, I got a job, but I need the $22 from Goodwill to get a uniform so I can go to work and make money. That was a great story and a great pitch. The problem was the girl behind me said, you told my dad that story 2 weeks ago and we gave you money. This also works in emails. So this is a really bad email I wrote to give you an idea of how this works. Susie, after a week of torture, I have those TPS reports filled out, except the fields for last year's balances. Will you please forward me last year's balance sheet so I can finish up and send those babies to the higher-ups? This is how every Kickstarter pitch works too. This is straight. Hey y'all, it's been such a pleasure meeting so many of you on our 2011 world tour. The good news is we have a whole new batch of songs written. The bad news is our label just went under and we're out of money. We need your help to record a new album. And that's how it goes. You use that formula in your emails, it works a lot. Not every time, but it works a lot. So the 10th piece of advice I would say is practice writing in public. Start a blog, get on Twitter, and start sharing your ideas. The simple act of having your ideas out in public will make you a better writer. I actually test out a lot of my one-liners on people on my Twitter, and so that's where a lot of the ideas start. I know I ran over. I have just a couple of more pieces here. Reading list, real quick. Anne Lamont, Bird by Bird. And I'm actually going to post all these on my blog, so if you follow me on Twitter or go to my blog, I'll have them posted by the end of the day. Right. Linda Berry's What It Is. Great, great writing book. Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. That'll actually teach you about communication and storytelling. And it can actually work for other mediums too. Finally, there's a blog called Unsuck It, which is hilarious. Mike Montero and Erica Hall run this out of Mule Design, and it's a great, great anecdote to all those horrible words you hear in agency life, like learnings and ask is a noun, that kind of thing. And finally, I would follow this guy named Sam Anderson. He's Shamble Anderson on Twitter. He every day he posts his favorite sentence that he read that day. And collects really good sentences. And finally, have fun. Work on your writing, get better, and just enjoy it. Thanks.